Hello, and welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Candace Worzbowski.
And I'm Stephanie Spiker.
Steph, what kind of milk did you drink when you were in elementary school?
You know, I don't know if I honestly paid that close attention. I think, though, when we were pretty little, it was normally whole milk. And then I think as we got a little older, it was more of a 2% vibe.
So what milk did you pick out for yourself if you were buying milk at school?
Whole milk.
Okay. I was a chocolate milk girl.
Oh, well, yeah, chocolate milk, which I think was whole milk chocolate milk. I actually
Yes,
don't
I
know.
think it usually is. I'm still a chocolate milk girl. Well, Krista Byler, who I spoke to recently, ran a pretty interesting study about whole milk in schools. So she is the food service director at Union City Area School District in Pennsylvania. And her study gained attention in the dairy industry. It was basically a whole milk pilot program that ran during the 2019 to 2020 school year. And it got some pretty interesting results. Basically, the school was just offering fat-free and 1% milks with the students' lunches as usual. And for 2 months then, they measured how much of that milk was being consumed and how much was being wasted, meaning thrown out. Then, after those 2 months, they expanded their offerings to include whole milk, both unflavored and chocolate. And they didn't tell the students ahead of time that they were doing this. They just did it and let the students choose for themselves. And again, they studied how much milk was being drunk and how much was being wasted. And the findings, like I said, were very interesting. Steph, are you ready for the results?
I am ready.
Okay, so when the students were only offered fat-free and 1% milk, they wasted 3 gallons of milk a day.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
Yeah. When they were offered whole milk, that went down to 19 ounces, which is about a 95% reduction in waste if you do the math. And on top of that, the amount of milk being consumed went up 50% during that time. So naturally, this study has caught the attention of the dairy industry and of lawmakers. Krista has testified about her findings in Congress before the U.S. Senate Ag Committee. It's kind of a big deal. So let's let her explain the study a little more and hear about what the students thought of it. Krista, welcome to the Farmhouse.
Thanks for having me.
So let's dive right into why you're here. What inspired you to launch the Whole Milk in Schools experiment? Where did that come from?
Sure. It started when we had switched over in 2012 to the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids standards. And I started to just really visually see the amount of waste that we had with the milk and also the lack of students selecting milk. So it was kind of, double-edged sword. We had students no longer taking milk, and a lot of those who did choose it were not drinking it. At the time, my husband was a dairy farmer. He has since transitioned out of dairy into beef and grain, but during the 2012 school year, most of our neighbors were dairy farmers as well. So I knew their end of the business and, definitely have a heart for our students. And I had heard a lot of grumbling about not having the choices that we used to. So that kind of was the starting point where I really took notice and thought somebody needs to do something about this, but I didn't really know what to do. So in 2018, I attended a conference which is put on through our School Nutrition Association, and it's called the Legislative Action Conference, where food service directors have an opportunity to meet with their legislators. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to meet with G.T. Thompson, who has always been our ag advocate for Pennsylvania. And I was kind of the noisy milk lunch lady who was bringing, these concerns. I think at that point, our other school food service directors that were with us in the group didn't have the dairy connection. So I think, although they knew it was an important topic, they didn't feel it the way I did.
Right.
Because
it wasn't an emotional point for
yeah.
them.
So we had some really good dialogue with GT and his staffers, and they connected me with the Pennsylvania Grassroots Dairy Committee. So 2018 was really the turning point where I felt like I was able to help in a small way with the Grassroots Committee. I was the only school nutrition person on the panel at that point. So I was able to kind of bridge the gap between boots on the ground, real action versus the legislation, because I think oftentimes what sounds really great on paper might not be actionable in the way that we want it to be or need it to be to fully implement something well. So that's kind of been my role, is to just speak to, this is great, but we need to tweak it in order to make it work in the real time, real world cafeteria setting. That's kind of where the saturated fat part came into play with the revised legislation, because I had talked with many of the food service directors in the state, and their big concern was, how do we make this work? Not only calorically, but the fat. The fat was the big sticking point at that point in time. And so the rest is kind of history. That 2018 meeting with the dairy committee really spurred the interest in doing some form of pilot, because without data, we really don't know.
Right.
So that was something that GT and the committee both felt were kind of the lacking piece of information that we needed to get momentum to move the bills forward. And at that point in time, our school board had several dairy farmers or former farmers or people that were involved in hauling animals. There was a very heavy agricultural background on our board, so they were all for it.
Okay. So tell us about the experiment itself.
Sure.
What happened?
So it started with our student council. They had implemented a recycling program for the milk cartons, and we did a 2-month base study on waste. So we offered just the fat-free and 1% milks at that point, and they gauged the waste for 2 months. And then after the first 2 months, we very unceremoniously introduced all of the milk offerings, from fat-free to whole milk, both unflavored and chocolate. We had stocked the coolers so that on a Monday morning they came in and had all of the offerings. And we didn't, promote it. We didn't advertise it, because we really wanted true data. And we felt like if there was any kind of promotion behind it, we wouldn't get the raw numbers. So we did that for 3 months. And at the time, the plan was 3 months on, 2 months off, 3 months on. However, COVID happened after the 2-month waste study, so we were never able to fully finish the last 3 months. We were luckily enough able to, get the data we did. And then because all of our students were remote learning, we were able to get the survey that we had intended on doing in May. We sent that out in March and got some student feedback. Definitely less than I had hoped, but I'm just thankful that we were able to complete that part of it. And the physical results were really eye-opening. We had 3 gallons of milk on average daily that was wasted, down to 19 ounces. So it was a 95% reduction in waste. And then based on our ordering and our inventory and the system we had in place with student council, really made it easy to gauge waste, because no one was throwing away a half full milk. No one was throwing away an empty milk. Everything was collected through them for the recycling program. So we had a 50% increase in actual consumption.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, both very,
quite a difference.
Very eye-opening. And we're a 1,000 student district, so every district's different. We're not all going to see that, but I think just doing that trial makes all the difference. It really makes you aware of what the students want and like. And I think, schools that are unsure would really recognize that the average daily participation tends to go up. The waste certainly goes down.
Mm-hmm.
And student satisfaction is definitely a key part of that as well.
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about the student response to having, expanded milk options at lunch, including whole milk. What feedback did you hear directly from them? I mean, did they talk about the taste and the texture, or was it just more kind of like I liked it better, or how deep into it did they get?
At the onset, it was more generalized. Like, we're so glad to have the choices back. Our athletes were probably the most vocal on
Oh,
the
right.
beginning phase of it because it was wrestling season. And, so they were like, this is a perfect recovery drink. This is what we
Yep.
need. Thank you. And as we started getting into the later months and our FFA kids and our ag class got involved, they started actually doing some marketing. They made a video, which is adorable, about it. It's kind of like a survey of what do you drink at home? What milk do you like at school? Why do you like the milk at school? Why do you not like the milk at school? So there was a lot of different aspects to that video, but their overwhelming answer was, we want a choice. We want what tastes good, what has a good mouthfeel, what is satisfying. So that was kind of the takeaway of the video. And they were very different in their responses. I mean, it wasn't like whole milk, was the only answer. We had students that said, I drink skim at home. That's what's familiar with me. And that's what I like at school. And that's great. Our goal is really just to meet the students where they're at and meet their needs.
That's great. I'm sure they appreciated that.
Yeah, they were definitely angry though when we took it away.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, yeah, of course, they've tasted freedom.
Yeah.
So what message do you hope that this experiment sends to policymakers or nutrition officials?
I hope that we can get back to the point where we're realizing that the science behind the reasoning that this happened is out of date and out of touch. And, our students, it's not that we're asking for everyone to have whole milk. We're just asking to be able to offer a full variety so that they can choose. At our district, we also do a plant-based milk and a lactose-free milk. And I know there's a lot of talking points in the legislation where I think people are very concerned about that. I don't think that needs to be a concern. It's not a difficult thing to implement those items as well. I think we just need to do better for our students and our farmers and figure out a way to make this make sense for the schools and for our students.
Okay. So you mentioned that your husband and also the people you live around, that, it's the dairy community. What did they think about the experiment that you guys were doing?
They were all glad that we were doing it. Unfortunately, 80% of them have sold out in that time period. So
That's such a shame.
yes, we have 2 remaining farms in our area that are still dairy. The rest either transition to beef or grain or are no longer farming at all. So that's a tough one.
Yeah.
'Cause, I feel like it's a little too late for a lot of the dairy in, especially northwestern Pennsylvania, but hopefully we can make a difference for the rest that are still operating.
Right. Yeah. All right. So let's pivot a little. I wanted to ask, just as a culinary professional working in a school setting, how do you balance nutrition and nutritional standards with, I guess, the food that the kids actually want to eat? I have an 8-year-old, and I'm sure that if he was able to choose, he would eat pizza for lunch every single day. And obviously that is not something that's, advisable, I would say. So how do you work out that balance?
It's tricky. There's definitely something to be said for even the pizza that we serve in schools. It's not the pizza you buy in the store. So I think there's definitely, I don't want to say misinformation, but I think people don't really realize that everything we serve almost is whole grain. Most of what we serve is reduced sodium, reduced sugar. So yeah, ideally you don't want your child eating pizza every day, but a lot of schools have transitioned or are transitioning to more scratch preparation. I think we're really getting back to kind of the roots of what it was like 40 years ago and the respect that we're making the foods in the kitchen. We're not doing heat and eat as much.
Right.
Our district has won an HMI award for innovation in school meals preparation. So I'm really proud of that. It's been a lot of hard work for my staff. We're doing a lot of scratch breakfast, a lot of scratch lunch, and we do a lot of taste testing with the students because obviously if they're not receptive to it, it's not worth putting on the menu. So last week we did a tasting week where, Monday we featured 4 scratch prepared soups. We had breakfast items on Tuesday that, was a breakfast quesadilla and scratch prepared cinnamon rolls, which are whole grain and, very lightly glazed. So the sugar is much lower than what you'd get. But the taste and the smell were like Cinnabon quality to our students. So we really try hard to, again, meet them where they're at. Our students are way more food savvy than, we were when we went to school. They all seem to watch some sort of food show, or they're on all the different forms of social media, seeing these things. So we have to operate as a restaurant. We can't expect to be thinking that they're just going to eat here because they're here. That has definitely been a transition from the old mindset of school cafeteria. They're our customer. We have to market our program. We have to make the food appealing and give them a lot of variety. We have in our district, the elementary level runs a 20-day cycle. So they have 3 entree options each day. It's not a lot. It's pretty simplistic. The high school, we have on average 27 entree options a day.
Wow.
So there's a lot of opportunity to choose. We have freshly made salads, wraps, meal kits, like little charcuterie boxes. That's just one line. We have a Subway concept where they can build their own salad and get a soup or a sandwich. We have the daily pizza line, which we put scratch-made quesadillas and pizza on. So we're able to really control the nutritionals so much better by doing the scratch prepared. So it's a lot of moving parts, and it's a lot of kind of like putting a puzzle together to make sure the nutritionals line up with the menu mix, which also lines up with the student wants and needs. So it's definitely an interesting process.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like a completely different world from when I was in high school.
Yes.
Those pizzas sound a lot better than I remember kind of the cardboardy
the
square pizzas that were definitely just, I think, nuked in the microwave or something like that. They really weren't that appealing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that all sounds great. So where do you hope to see the future of school nutrition heading, especially when it comes to offering kids, real whole foods that are good for them and delicious?
Yeah, I think the movement to scratch cooking is definitely where we need to focus. Unfortunately, with some of the funding cuts that have happened recently, there's definitely a large concern. I know in the state of Pennsylvania, luckily we have a governor who is very supportive and is trying to do his best to keep things moving forward. But those local purchasing agreements were very important to the local foods movement, to the farm to table or farm to school movement. And they did assist with scratch preparation as well, because we do want to source locally in addition to the scratch movement. So I think we just have to get creative and think outside the box and figure out where we can come up with the money to make this work. Our reimbursement rates are about $4.50 for a lunch, which has to cover all of our overhead. So, lighting, refuse, benefits, payroll, all of it has to, work. And that's a challenge to make a good, healthy, scratch prepared meal with that kind of cost restraint. So finding some additional funding, I think, is paramount to make this work. And training is very important. In my district, almost all of our staff were stay-at-home moms. And when their kids went to school, they came to work. So we don't have a lot of training prior to coming into the district. So I know that's something a lot of schools need support on. Obviously they're willing, they love the kids, they want to do what's right. It's just getting them the appropriate level of training so that we can handle raw proteins and, we're doing all the food safety things that we want to do. So I think it's definitely funding, training, and just continue building on the scratch cooking and local foods movement.
Okay. So yeah, speaking of the local foods movement, you mentioned that you do some farm to school business there. Is that something that you think a lot of the students are aware of, or if their parents are aware of it, or how's that working out for you?
I think they're not as aware as we would like them to be. We do have a website. We put a lot of information on there. I don't really know how many of them actually see it. We have definitely been able to do a little bit more media coverage since the Senate hearing. Luckily, that has had a really nice ripple effect in that we're able to share our story in the local media. So definitely, I think we have some attention that hadn't been there before from our families. I know in your area, like Tulpehocken specifically, has an amazing farm to school and local procurement program, and they do an excellent job of social media coverage. I'm a little bit jealous of some of the stuff they have going on because we aren't quite there yet with social media. We're not allowed to utilize anything outside of our website. But yeah, I think definitely you have to tell your story and you have to market your program. And sometimes it's getting creative and partnering with the PTO or, our agricultural program and having those students spread the word.
Right. So what does it mean to you to be a woman in agriculture?
I guess I don't view myself as an agriculturist. I mean, but
you do work with farmers.
I am a proud woman to support agriculture, I guess is the way I look at it. Because since the onset of this, I've always said that my goal through this whole process is to help our students and help our farmers.
And it sounds like you're doing both. So kudos.
We're trying.
Yeah. Krista, thank you so much for, again, taking the time to speak with me. I thought this was a really interesting experiment. And I have hope that other schools may replicate it and figure out that there's something here that's worth paying attention to.
Yes, I hope so as well.
That was a really interesting discussion with you and Krista. I really do love the fact that she has a very unique perspective where she works every day with schools and the food systems there and the nutrition and all of that. But she does actually have experience with the dairy industry.
Right.
So that's like a very unique perspective. And I love how at the end of the day, I think really what she found is that kids want to just have a say in what they're eating.
Right. Yeah.
Which should not be shocking, because at the end of the day, if a student prefers skim milk or a low-fat milk, that's great. Please drink it, enjoy it. But it is nice to know that when the kids were able to just pick what they wanted to eat or drink, that there would be less waste. I mean, and that makes so much sense that if you get to pick what you're eating or drinking that day, that you're ideally going to take what you want and then not have food waste. And that sounds like a win to me.
Right. I mean, to be honest, it sounds like the food that's being served up in Krista's kitchens at those schools is miles beyond what I was being fed at schools when I was coming up. I mean, they're cooking from scratch.
You guys actually referenced the square pizza.
Iconic.
Oh my gosh, I remember those days too.
Yeah, but I mean, like, back to the milk, I love that, she's thinking of her students as customers because, like, we can talk all day about the nutrition behind milk, but when it comes down to it, kids are going to drink what they want or they won't drink it at all.
Yeah.
As we saw with the food waste. And that's, like, especially, the case in school where you don't have a parent who's standing behind you or sitting across from you at the table saying, drink your milk.
Yeah.
There's no enforcement there. So you really have to make milk appealing to the kids, regardless of what kind of milk it is. You need to give them what they want to drink.
I like the way they did it, where it was like, we're not going to tell anyone, like any of the students, that we're doing this, that we're adding these options. It's not getting promoted like, starting Monday, you might be able to have whole milk. Like, it just showed up and the kids naturally just picked what they wanted. There were no outside voices telling them what they should or shouldn't take. It was just like, oh, cool, this is available. I'm going to take that.
Yeah. So good job, Krista. I thought it was a great study. I think, it provides some really interesting talking points about perhaps reintroducing whole milk to schools.
Yeah.
Thank you all for listening. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And if you really like this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or thoughts about the episode, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for listening and visiting us at the farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Candace.
And we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2025 by Lancaster Farming newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Wierzbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock and Justin Berger. The music is by Tin Bird Shadow.